What I want to do tonight is um, a little ambitious. I hope I don't bury you all here. Um, I'm if I'm going too fast or being too obscure, please let me know. I'm going to try to make this understandable, at least to myself. Let's start with the very beginning of Parshat Behar. Okay, here we go. Okay, so here's the text. The opening psukim of Parshat Behar. Daber b'nei Israel v'amata lehem ki tavo'u el haaretz asher ani noten lachem v'shavata haaretz Shabbat l'Adonai. This is the command for Shemitah. So when we enter the land, we are commanded to have Shemitah. How long will it be? 1 year out of 6. Sheshanim tizar sadecha v'sheshanim tizar kanecha v'asafta tuata. Uvashana hashvi'it Shabbat Shabbaton yeh la'aretz. Shabbat l'Adonai sadecha lo tizra v'chamecha lo tizmor. Et tzefiach yitzirecha lo tiktzor v'et inivei nizrecha lo tivtzor. Shanat Shabbaton yeh la'aretz. If we read these psukim carefully, I think we hopefully you'll get the sense that I'm getting as well, that while certainly this is a commandment to us, that's something we need to do and something that is forbidden for us to do, and we're going to talk about this at length. But beyond that, there's passive language here at the top. V'shavita haaretz Shabbat l'Adonai. The land will take a year off. And then it's repeated down here, Shanat Shabbaton yeh la'aretz. And we certainly need to ask ourselves, what's going on here? In what sense can we talk about the land being commanded to do something? But that's certainly what it says in the pasuk, V'shavata haaretz Shabbat l'Adonai, Shanat Shabbaton yeh la'aretz. Now, the second one, you could say it's passive. There will be a year off for the land. But in the first one, it certainly seems almost like a command. Almost. Okay. Let's look how the Rambam treats this at the very opening of Hilchot Shemitah V'Yovel. Rambam, as he does in the beginning of all sets of halachot, he has, and at the beginning of the book as well, has a list of the mitzvot that we are going to be discussing. And he makes it clear that there are 13 mitzvot in Shemitah V'Yovel, but he makes it clear that for the purpose of our discussion today, the beginning of Parshat Behar, there's one mitzvah taseh and 2 mitzvot lo ta'aseh. What's the mitzvah taseh? Mitzvah taseh lishbot me'avodat ha'aretz v'avodat ha'ilam b'shana shvi'it shene'emar v'shavata ha'aretz Shabbat l'Adonai v'ne'emar b'charish u'v'katzir tishbot. V'chol ha'oseh melacha me'avodat ha'aretz o ilanot b'shana zo bitel mitzvat aseh. And v'avara lo ta'aseh shene'emar sadecha lo tizra v'chamecha lo tizmor. Eino loke min haTorah ela al hazriya o al hazmira ve'al haksira o al habetzira ve'echad hakerem ve'echad shar ilanot. For our purposes, we're going to stop here. We have a mitzvah aseh to suspend our working of the land, and if we do not do so, not only we have not fulfilled the mitzvah aseh, but we have violated what we call a bitul aseh. We have violated the mitzvah taseh of v'shavata haaretz. And the mitzvah lo taseh is planting or pruning. That's one mitzvah lo taseh, and harvesting from either the grapes or the trees. So those are the three mitzvot, one aseh, two lo taseh, that we're going to focus on. And we're going to be looking a lot at Rambam's methodology, not because this is a shiur about methodology. I wouldn't do that to you. This is a shiur about understanding how mitzvot work in general, not how Rambam works. But Rambam obviously is our point of departure. Rambam, in his Sefer Mitzvot, generally, and you have to be careful with generalizations, generally will list separately a mitzvat aseh and a mitzvat lo taseh that are parallel to each other. For example, here in Shemitah, we have the mitzvat aseh to not work the land, and I'm saying to not work the land, right? To have this shmita, to have this suspension of labor, that's a mitzvah taseh. And we have the mitzvot lo taseh, not to plant and not to harvest. Now, it would be completely reasonable for you to ask, okay, so how is that different? Are they not two sides of the exact same coin? If I am not harvesting and planting, then I am suspending work in the land. If I'm suspending my working of the land, then I'm not harvesting and planting. So why do I need both? And indeed, this is a machloket. Do we need both? And now we need to talk a little bit about a historical introduction. Rambam Sefer Mitzvot has, for the last 1,000 years, been assumed to be a rejoinder to the Sefer Mitzvot of the Bahag, one of the later Gaonim. And to a very large degree, that's absolutely true. But beyond the Sefer Mitzvot of the Bahag, what we now know, and we can only say this now, until 10 years ago, we didn't know this. We now know that to a almost equal degree, Rambam's Bar Plugta, Rambam's learning partner, in effect, 200 years later, was Saadia Gaon. A lot of what Rambam is arguing for or arguing against in his Sefer HaMitzvot is that he's arguing against Saadia Gaon's Sefer HaMitzvot, which was lost to history for over 1,000 years. There were some scholars who were aware that there was such a work, and it was quoted here and there, but we didn't have the text. But about 80% of the text has been recovered from the Cairo Geniza, published about half a year ago by Rav Sabato and his brother, by way of Yad Ben Tzvi. So we have most of the work, and of course, a wonderful critical edition from Rav Sabato, translated into Hebrew, the originals in Arabic, and cross-referenced to anything you might conceivably want to cross-reference, and it's a completely usable work. And what we see, what is revealed with the publication of Saadia's Sefer Mitzvot, is that many of the strange statements that Rambam makes in his Sefer Mitzvot, anyone who thinks the following is simply wrong, and we don't know who he's referring to, we now know that he's referring to Saadia Gaon. But he never refers to him by name, but out of respect, he simply says whoever says this is wrong. One of Rambam's arguments with Saadia Gaon is exactly this issue. When there's a mitzvah aseh and a lo taseh that seem to be complete and total mirror images of each other, do we and why do we list them separately in the Sefer Mitzvot? So Rambam, in his introductory chapters to the Sefer Mitzvot, he has his Shorashim. The sixth Shoresh is exclusively devoted to this subject, that yes, Rambam is going to list a mitzvah taseh and a mitzvah lo taseh, even though they seem to cover much the same ground. What I want to explain today is why that is generally needs to be true. What do we gain by listing both? I'll throw an example of where it's true and maybe an example where it's not true, just so you can get a feel for what we're discussing. Hilchot Shabbat, much like Hilchot Shemitah, we have a command to keep the Shabbat, a positive command. We also have a whole bunch of mitzvot lo taseh, the things that we're not permitted to do on Shabbat. You might see them as mirror images of each other, but if we think about the way we live our lives, and we'll give credit to Fred, who wrote a wonderful essay on this subject this morning, which the Shul will be publishing for this Shabbat, on how Shabbat is a lot more than just not doing the things you're not allowed to do. And a lot of what we do on Shabbat is built around creating an atmosphere that we feel is Shabbat. And the mitzvot lo taseh, the things we're forbidden to do on Shabbat, are actually in support of the Shabbat atmosphere. It's not like Shabbat is really one big lo taseh, and we are filling in the gap by adding a bunch of mitzvot, things to do, kiddush, meals, tefillot. To the contrary, Shabbat is a Shabbat atmosphere, which is supported by the mitzvot lo taseh, that if we were to do the things that we're forbidden to do, it would draw us away from the atmosphere of Shabbat. That's one example. I'll throw out a question. The foods that we're not allowed to eat, let's say the animals, the birds, the fish that we're not allowed to eat. So we know that we're not allowed to eat this, 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 and this. Is it a mitzvah aseh to eat the kosher animals? No, it's not. You're not obligated to eat kosher animals. If you want to eat animals, you have to eat the kosher ones. So the mirror image there doesn't truly exist. But we can definitely sustain the argument, and we discussed this in a shir about 2 years ago. We can sustain the argument that there is a positive mitzvah to positively identify those foods that we're eating as being kasher. It's not just about not eating, I don't know, pork. It's about identifying the chicken that we are, yes, going to eat as being a kosher chicken. Now, that doesn't mean we need to make a recitation. It's sufficient that when we go to the fridge and open the package, or when we go to the store and buy the chicken, we make sure that we're buying it from a kosher supplier. So eating kosher, I think we can sustain the argument that having a positive identification of the simanim of kosher food may actually be a mitzvah. Again, it's a machloket. Everything's a machloket. But I think we can sustain that argument. And there are so many mitzvot where you need to ask yourself, and that's basically what we're going to talk about today, when I am not doing a mitzvah lo ta'aseh, am I automatically, concurrently doing a mitzvah ta'aseh? Okay, this is not my question. This goes back all the way to basically to the Parshanim and the Torah, to the Chachamim, the Tanaim. And the question becomes, what is the nature of the mitzvah aseh of Shemitah? And there are those who argue that the classical differentiation of mitzvot between a chovat gavra and a chovat chefza, gavra being Aramaic for a person. So is this a mitzvah that is incumbent on the person, or is it incumbent on the land? So certainly the mitzvah lo taseh is always going to be incumbent on the person, right? One may not do X. But the passive language of the opening pasuk V'shavata haaretz.
I don't know, Bob. So look.
The passive language of the opening pasuk, V'shavata haaretz, seems to imply that there's a mitzvah that the land needs to rest. The land is not a person. So is it a mitzvah that devolves on the land itself? No, not necessarily. It devolves upon us, perhaps, to ensure that the land should rest. And I want to give an example that you would think has nothing to do with anything, but let's go to Hilchot Shabbat. Hilchot Shabbat in the Rambam, you're not allowed to lend or rent, or even Chachamim expanded even to sell a large animal to a goy that you generally use to work your fields. Without getting into the details here, basically Chazal have said you cannot make a workaround. If you remember the words in the Aseret HaDibrot, which become part of the Kiddush of Shabbat for most people, that we are required to not do melacha, me, my wife, my children, my servants, and even my animals. And lahalacha, we call this shvitat behemto. My animal needs to take Shabbat off. You might have thought that, well, I'll sell my animal to a guy, and then my animal can work on Shabbat. So the halacha is that, no, you may not do that. You may not create a fictitious arrangement where you transfer temporarily ownership of the animal to a guy so that you could use the animal on Shabbat, or the animal will on its own do it. And that's absolutely a halacha that one cannot argue with. What you can argue about is, how does that apply to your equipment? How does that apply to a corporation that you own shares in? But certainly a wholly owned corporation, you're not allowed to have your workers work, even if it's in another country and you're not there telling them what to do. Very complicated halachot. And I'm sure some of you are thinking, but we do these things all the time. Selling to a guy, we're 5 weeks after Pesach, and that's exactly what we do, right? We sell our chametz to a guy. How come we're allowed to sell our chametz to a guy? We're less than a year and a half to the next Shemitah, and we're thinking about, once again, we're going to have the big argument about the heter mechira. Can we go through a semi-fictitious sale of the entire land to some guy so that the farmers can continue to work the land? From the halacha and Shabbat, it would seem that no, you're not allowed. Yet we all know that we do sell our chametz, and that Chazal did enact the prusbul to allow the collection of debts, and later Chachamim enacted the heter mechira to sell the land, to allow us to work the land. What's going on here? Why should that be allowed? When I want to go down to the bottom of the page here is Mishnah and Tmura that will be very surprising to you. Ketzad ma'arimim ala bechor. Ha'arama is a fictitious workaround of halacha. And Chazal are leading us through how to go about avoiding the halacha of Maser Behema. That's the very end of this week's second parsha. Maser Behema, kol asher yavor tachad hashavet, hasiri yeh kodesh l'Adonai. 1/10 of all your newborn animals are Maser. A firstborn animal to his mother is Maser Behema as well. There are all sorts of masrot that, and here Chazal are teaching us how to avoid giving your Bechor Behema to the Kohen. And they tell us how. It's unbelievable. They tell us step by step exactly how to do this, how to avoid giving your Maser, your Bechor Behema to the Kohen. Why are Chazal teaching us how to do this? Whatever happened to the spirit of the law? So we have to ask ourselves, what's going on here? In the case of Shemitah, whatever happened to V'shavat ha'aretz? God wants the land to rest. How is it that the Rabbanut Rashit is going to lend its hand to sell it? Not lending its hand. They're going to do it. They're going to write the contracts, sign up the farmers, sign up the kibbutzim, find the right guy, and sell him the land for a year. What's going on here? Okay. What I'm going to argue is that the mitzvah taseh and the mitzvah lo taseh of Shemitah are not exactly parallel, even though in the language of the Rambam, they seem to be very parallel. If we look at what the Rambam says in the opening about the mitzvah taseh, he says, if you do the things that you're not allowed to do, right? V'chol ha'oseh melacha me'avodat ha'aretz o ha'ilanot b'shana zo bitel mitzvah taseh. Rambam has created an exact equality between the mitzvot lo taseh. If you do one of the two things that you're not allowed to do down here, you mevatel de'aseh. So it sounds like Rambam is saying exactly that the mitzvah taseh is complete mirror image of the mitzvah lo taseh. So how are we to understand all this? Okay, so I'm going to rely on Rav Rabinovich and his analysis of these halachot, but it's not just his analysis of these halachot, it's his approach to halacha in general. First of all, let's talk philosophically. What's a mitzvah lo taseh? Mitzvot lo taseh are, by the very definition, you shall not. Whatever it is you shall not do, you shall not do it. There's no way to spin the mitzvah lo taseh as a positive act. They're all things that we don't do. If we don't do them, how have we changed? Well, we haven't. If we violate the mitzvah lo taseh and we improperly do something that we shouldn't, we have harmed ourselves spiritually and theologically. But if we do the mitzvot properly, we do not violate any of the mitzvot lo taseh. Maybe because we're just sitting in our chair and not doing anything ever. We have not made any spiritual progress. We are not building ourselves, moving ourselves in any proper direction. We're simply not doing the wrong thing. A mitzvah taseh moves us in the proper direction. Rambam in the Moreh lists three main categories of the mitzvot that they either bring us to proper thoughts or to proper character traits or to strengthen the society that we live in. Those are the main purposes, for the Rambam anyway, of the mitzvot taseh. So even if we don't do the things we're forbidden to do, if we don't do the mitzvot taseh, we're not making any progress theologically. And our whole purpose is to make that very progress, to strengthen our societies, to improve our character traits, and to move ourselves along intellectually and theologically and philosophically to our better understanding of God. Those are the mitzvot aseh. In the perfectly reasonable parallel to the mitzvah of Shabbat, we have the mitzvot aseh of Shabbat, which move us along spiritually, and we have the mitzvot lo taseh, which the violation of which move us away from where we need to be. Similarly, with the Shemitah, I think it's totally reasonable to argue that the mitzvah lo taseh are things that violate both the letter and the spirit of the law of the Shemitah, but the mitzvah aseh v'shaveta haaretz, that we make sure that the land stays passive, that we are cognizant of the fact that we are not merely not working the land, but we are consciously acknowledging God's dominion of the land. We are taking the time to acknowledge that, as the psukim say later in the chapter, that the God will command his blessing for us so that the sixth year and the sixth year will produce enough agricultural produce that it will carry us through for the seventh, eighth, and all the way to the ninth year. Again, we can argue with the Parshanim what we mean by 6, 7, 8, and 9, but it doesn't matter. Philosophically, to acknowledge God's blessing by taking a step away from our constant rush to work the land and go to work and do all those other things, but we take a step back for philosophical contemplation, that's a mitzvah taseh, v'shaveta haaretz Shabbat ladonai. So there's a mitzvah taseh and there's a mitzvah lo taseh, and they're different and separate from each other, and they accomplish different things. Do they overlap? Do they complement each other? Of course they do, but they're not one and the same. So for Rambam, they need to be listed separately. Before we get into general thoughts of mitzvot, which I think is more important, I want to get back to the question that I threw out. How is it that Chazal can lead us through Ketzad Ma'arimim ala Bechor? How can Chazal give us instructions how to avoid Bechor Behemah? How can Chazal give us instructions to sell our chametz? How can Chazal give us instructions to do heter mechira or pruzbol? On the other hand, Chazal absolutely add halachot to prevent us from violating the principle of shvitat behemto on Shabbat. And just to answer that question, because it's such an obvious question, all of these ha'aramot that Chazal are presenting before us are workarounds, trickery, if you insist on using the word, to avoid halachot d'Rabbanan. Chazal will not give us instructions or tools to avoid a mitzvah d'oraita. Chazal built into the system that we can have a workaround on a din d'Rabbanan. Chazal made the din d'Rabbanan, so they allow us to find a way not to violate the din d'Rabbanan, but to avoid it, to create a legal fiction, but only for dinim d'Rabbanan, for hilchot Shabbat. If we were to, as it were, sell our animal to a goy for Shabbat, and then the animal will go out there and work, that totally undermines the principle of Shabbat. How does this apply to Shemitah? Is Shemitah not a din d'oraita? Well, of course it is, but not today. Today, almost all the poskim, and let's just say all the poskim agree that Shemitah bismanenu is a din d'Rabbanan, and therefore we allow ourselves the loophole, the legal fiction of the heter mechira. If Shemitah today was d'oraita, no one, absolutely no one, would allow the heter mechira. Rav Rabinovich felt even more strongly that Today, the Shemitah is not even a din d'Rabbanan, but rather it's a minhag Chasidut, but that's a different sugya. We've covered it before, and it's way too long anyway. So having gotten that out of the way, let's get back to the idea of mitzvot in general. And I'd like to quote from Rav Rabinovich himself. He has this wonderful book called Misilot Bilvavam. It came out, I don't know, a year or two ago, maybe three. Various essays, some of which were rewritten for this book, and 5 years ago. Okay. And some of which are new for the book. And they deal with central questions of the individual in his society. In other words, how is it to live as a Jew today? The society, the second section of the book, what does it mean to be a Jew in the modern world? How does halakha apply to society, to governments, to military? Because for 2,000 years, we didn't have sovereignty, and now we do. And we're trying to live as proper Torah Jews, and we have no guidance. So we have 500 pages of essays in Hebrew, simple Hebrew, but still 500 pages, on how we live as a Jew in the modern world. So in the chapter called Tzivuyim Chiyuvim Umatarot, the interplay between commandments, obligations, and ideals, and how they interweave themselves in creating a halacha. And the subchapters here, I think, are enlightening in and of themselves. Ikarei ha'emunah kitzivuyim, the fundamentals of faith as commandments. The tension between mitzvot and matarot, the object and the function of the mitzvah. Improving society. The fourth section, b'chol d'rachecha da'ehu, we need to be cognizant of God all the time. Emunah v'deot k'matarot, beliefs and concepts as ends unto themselves. Arevut hadadit, interpersonal obligation that we have to each other. Avodah me'ahava, the worship of God from joy, from a status of joy. Okay, it's a seminal chapter in a seminal book, and in this chapter, what Rav Rabinovich is doing is, I want to quote a short quote here. We have to finish soon because Gedalia is starting any minute, and we need to eat a little. I just want to make a very short quote here. Mataratan v'tachlitan shel mitzvot. לפעמים החיוב להגשים את המטרה מתבטא אף הוא בדינים ופרטים מסוימים. אבל בנוסף על כך, יש תחום רחב של פעולה לקידום התכלית שלא הוגדר ואף לא ניתן להגדרה. ובתחום זה, הניחו מקום לכל אדם לעבוד את השם לפי אופיו הוא ולפי תכונותיו אשר חונן בהם. What is Rav Rabinovich saying here? I'll translate it, sort of. There are what modern writers will often call a meta halacha. There are concepts which are far greater than the halacha itself. The halacha has a purpose, and we dare not separate between the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. There are those who suggest that all we need is the spirit of the law and we don't need to engage in all the nitty-gritty of the details of the law. Those people are wrong as well, because it is inevitable that when people try to merely keep the spirit of the law without the letter of the law, they end up not doing that either. On the other hand, when we keep the letter of the law without even engaging with the spirit of the law, and when I say the spirit of the law, I mean the purpose of the law. What is the halakha trying to teach me? What behavior is the halakha trying to change in me? What concepts are being engaged when I perform the mitzvah? If we do not do that, then in the Rambam's rationalist world, the performance of the mitzvah is almost worthless. There are, and this is what Rav Rabinovich is saying, there are details in the concept of the law that cannot possibly be articulated not as a command to do something and not even as a command to think something, but they are central elements to our theology. So in the case of Shemitah, which is what we're talking about here, there's the central mitzvah of acknowledging God, as God keeps telling us to acknowledge that the land is His, and we need to show that with the mitzvot hatluyot ba'aretz, central of which is 1 year out of 7 to give up working the land. V'shavata ha'aretz Shabbat l'Adonai, the passive language, the land needs to rest, and we need to conceptualize, and more importantly, I guess the better word is internalize, what it is the Torah is teaching us when it tells us that we need to let the land rest. So, like in Shemitah, and what Rav Rabinovich is arguing is in every single mitzvah that we do, the mitzvah aseh is to move us along a philosophical continuum, and we need to expand rather than not contract, not to do the minimal that the Shulchan Aruch tells us to do, but we need to do more than the Shulchan Aruch tells us to do conceptually, which explains why on the issue of Hilchot Shabbat, where Rav Rabinovich is so machmir on what he calls ziluta de Shabbat, that if we allow too many electronic and other workarounds to halacha, we will perhaps not have violated the letter of the law, but we will have removed the heart and soul of the positive aspect of Shabbat, the lishmor at Shabbat l'kadisho. So, similar to Shabbat, that we need to infuse Shabbat with content, and we need to be extra careful about not using all sorts of clever fictions to turn Shabbat into just like any other day. Similarly with Shemitah, we need to understand the why of why we're doing it, and the positive, the mitzvah aseh of Shemitah. It's not just the mitzvah lo taseh, you will not harvest and you will not plant, but there's a mitzvah aseh to actively be aware that we are in the Shemitah and that the land is resting. And we need to apply these concepts to all the halachot, as we've spelled out here, as we spelled out here, as it applied to the mitzvah of Shemitah. Thank you all for coming early this week. Fred, you can relax. We are definitely not going back to shul next week. We're going to continue doing Sundays until such time as it's safe for everyone to come back to shul. And we'll see you next week.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Mark.
Thank you.